Hey everyone, I'm Parker.
And I'm Jonathan. Today, we will be diving into this crazy story of Ivan Nikolaevich Demjanjuk. He was a regular guy living in Ohio who was later accused of being a Nazi war criminal.
So, here's where it starts. He was born in Ukraine in 1920, and during World War II, he got drafted into the Soviet Army.
But in 1942, the Nazis captured him, and that's when his life started to change. Some reports say he ended up training with the Nazis to be a guard at the concentration camp. It is not totally clear if he was forced or if he volunteered.
Either way, it would come back to haunt him years later.
After the war, he moved to the U.S., and he changed his name to John Demjanjuk. He lived a pretty quiet life working at a car factory in Cleveland.
But in the 1970s, Holocaust survivors claimed him as Ivan the Terrible, a brutal guard from Treblinka. So the U.S. started looking into it.
And in 1986, he was sent to Israel for trial. It was huge. People watched it all over the world. In 1988, he was found guilty and sentenced to death.
But then, plot twist, after the Soviet Union collapsed, new documents came out saying someone else, Ivan Marchenko, was the real Ivan the Terrible.
So in 1993, Israel let him go. He came back to the U.S., and people thought that was it.
So to lead into the atrocity crimes committed by Demjanjuk, I think it's best if we go down the timeline of events. What do you think?
Sounds good. Let's get into it.
His crimes begin in the United States over the course of 30 years. But firstly, he was caught lying on the immigration forms in an attempt to hide the fact he was a Nazi collaborator.
In 1986, he was extradited to Israel to stand trial for war crimes he committed in Nazi Germany.
What were some of those crimes he was accused of?
Well, he was accused of murdering 28,000 Jews in Sobibor, and in total, 250,000 Jews were killed there.
Next, he worked at a camp called Majdanek that held tens of thousands of Jewish prisoners.
And the last concentration camp he worked in was Flossenburg, which was known for its harsh killings and execution of Jews.
These were some of the crimes he was accused of while being a guard for the Nazis, as this trial began in 1986.
Just 2 years later, however, he was sentenced to death for being Ivan the Terrible, named after the brutalist Russian Tsar, as he was guard at the Treblinka.
However, 5 years later, the courts overturned this ruling due to a lack of evidence, as they could not prove him to fully be Ivan the Terrible.
So what happens next?
Well, after the court's overturning, John decided to head back to the United States in hopes of his citizenship being restored.
So, did that happen? Yes, it did. His U.S. citizenship was restored in 1998.
However, this case was not over yet, as John's case was reopened just 3 years later when the U.S. authorities decided to focus on his time in Sobibor.
Then, just 1 year later, in 2002, his citizenship was revoked based on new evidence found.
Then, lastly, he was deported again in 2005 as his case had gone back to trial.
All of this led up to his trial and conviction beginning in 2009.
He was deported to Germany and arrested upon arrival.
2 years later, in 2011, he was convicted of the murder of 28,060 Jews at Sobibor and sentenced to 5 years in prison.
So now that the case has fully been covered, let's dive into the legal parts of it.
What do you mean?
I'm talking about the Rome Statute.
Oh yes, let's do that.
Sure, that's where the international law comes in. The Rome Statute, which established the International Criminal Court, allows for the prosecution of serious crimes like genocide and crimes against humanity, even the crimes that happened a long time ago.
Exactly. And the principles of universal jurisdiction mean that some crimes are so serious that any country can prosecute them, regardless of where they occurred.
So even if the crimes happened in another country, they can still be prosecuted?
Yes, and that's why Demjanjuk was tried in Israel.
They used the Nazi collaborators law, which allowed them to prosecute him for crimes committed during the Holocaust.
But there's a twist.
He was acquitted in Israel in 1993.
The court said there wasn't enough evidence to prove that he was Ivan the Terrible.
Well, who even was Ivan the Terrible?
He was a notorious guard at Treblinka.
So he was found not guilty?
What happens next?
After the acquittal, new evidence came up linking him to other camps like Sobibor. The U.S. courts said that under the principle of universal jurisdiction, They could revoke his citizenship because he lied about his past when immigrating.
So even though he was acquitted in Israel, the U.S. still took action because of the new evidence and his dishonesty.
So, in summary, this case reinforced core ideas that were once found in the Rome Statute.
As well, it showed that national courts have the ability and will follow through in prosecuting crimes that would fall under ICC jurisdiction.
It also showed that regardless of rank, anyone can be charged for international crimes.
And lastly, it highlights the importance of complementary, which is a principle in the Rome Statute that says the ICC acts only when national systems are unwilling or unable to prosecute. So after Demjanjuk was found guilty in Germany, people all over the world had strong opinions, and they weren't all on the same side.
Let's break it down. First, Holocaust survivors and Jewish organizations felt like this was a win for justice. For them, it didn't matter that he was old. What mattered was finally holding someone accountable for being part of a system that murdered innocent people.
Some survivors even said they had waited their whole lives to see a trial like this. Groups like Yad Vashem and the Simon Wiesenthal Center praised the decision. They said it was proof that justice can still happen even 60 or 70 years later.
But not everyone agreed. Demjanjuk's family and lawyers said the whole thing was unfair. They believed he was innocent, especially after he was cleared in Israel. His son, John Jr., was really vocal. He called the trials a witch hunt.
And yeah, a lot of people in the Ukrainian American community also felt this way. They said Demjanjuk had been a prisoner of war during World War II and might have been forced to work for the Nazis.
That led to the big question. Does it matter if someone was just following orders? Like if he didn't actually kill anyone with his own hands, should he have still been punished?
The German court said yes. They decided that just being a guard at a death camp like Sobibor, where thousands of people were murdered, meant you were part of the crime.
And that was the game changer. Before this, most Nazi trials needed proof that a person personally killed someone. Now, if you were part of how the camp worked, that was enough.
That made a lot of people nervous too. Some legal experts said, are we changing the rules too late in the game? Others asked, are these trials really about justice or just trying to make up for the fact that we let too many Nazis go free after the war?
It's a tough call, but for many people, especially survivors, seeing even one guard face consequences made them feel heard, like their pain mattered.
So here's what happens next. Demjanjuk's case set a brand new standard. After his trial, Germany started prosecuting more former Nazi guards, even ones who had never been charged before.
Like in 2015, a guy named Oskar Groening, the so-called bookkeeper of Auschwitz, was put on trial. He didn't kill anyone either, but he counted money stolen from the victims and kept records. He got convicted for being part of the system.
Then came Bruno Day in 2020. He was 93 and had been a guard at Stutthof, a concentration camp. And then in 2022, another former guard, Joseph Schultz, was convicted at 101 years old.
These trials never would have happened if not for the Demjanjuk's case. That verdict gave the court the green light to go after people who had been part of the camps, even without proving they committed specific murders.
But here's something to think about. Even though these guys were convicted, they didn't spend much or any time in jail. Most were too old or too sick to serve a sentence.
So people ask, what's the point? Why put someone on trial if they're going to die soon after?
The point wasn't really to punish. It was more about telling the truth, making it official, saying this happened and these people were a part of it. We remember.
And it made the world take another look at how we deal with war criminals and justice. Like, what do we do when decades have passed and we're still finding people who played a role?
It also raised new questions. Can justice be delayed and still be justice? Can someone be too old to face the truth?
And maybe the biggest question of all, what do we owe to history and the people who suffered?
In the end, Demjanjuk's story is not just about one man. It's about memory, justice, and what kind of world we want to live in. When reflecting on this case, many questions arise. One of them being, was Demjanjuk guilty? On one hand, he was cleared of being Ivan the Terrible. That was a case of mistaken identity, and it shows how memory can be unreliable, especially decades later.
But on the other hand, the evidence from Sobibor, like the ID card and the timeline, showed that he was probably a guard there. And if you were a guard at a camp where thousands were murdered, can you really say you had no part in it?
This is where the argument comes from Demjanjuk's family and lawyers. They believe that since this conviction is so far after the fact, the testimonies are not reliable. Another big takeaway is how complicated history and identity can be. Demjanjuk lived in America for decades. He was a neighbor, a husband, and a dad. People saw him as just a regular guy.
But then this whole other past comes out, and it makes you think, how many other people around this world are hiding dark histories? What does it mean to forgive, and who gets to decide?
It also shows us how much the world still cares about remembering the Holocaust. These trials are one way to make sure it is not forgotten, that we never stop asking questions and searching for truth.
And maybe that's the biggest lesson here. History just isn't about dates and names. It's about people and the choices they make, and how those choices affect the world even decades later.
So yeah, the John Demjanjuk case isn't just about one man. It's about truth, memory, and the fight for justice, even when it's hard, even when it's messy, and even when it's late.
And it's a reminder for all of us to never forget and to never look away from the past, no matter how uncomfortable it is.